We are back on our series on the Ten Commandments now for the 21st century. And this week we've moved on to the fifth commandment, honour thy father and thy mother. So we've looked at thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not tell lies, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not murder. So we're on to the fifth. Honour thy father and thy mother. Remember, when we started this, we was reflecting on a poll taken by YouGov a couple of years ago, and not all people really think the commandments are that important anymore. The ones we dealt with so far, including this one, most people think that there's a good reason for living out these commandments. As we said, we started off very high, 93, and honour your father and obey your honour your father and mother is down at 69% on average. That means there are 78% of Christians think it's important, and 60% of non-religious people think it's important. Can't understand why most Christians, or a few Christians, 22% of Christians, think it's not important when the Bible is full of stories and teaching about the importance of a family in the life of God's family. God's family is a family, and we are asked and should want to join God's family. So there's lots of teaching in the Bible about that. Let's remind us of ourselves of the Ten Commandments.
Deuteronomy chapter 5. Moses summoned all Israel and said, "Hear, Israel, the decrees and the laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire on the mountain. At that time I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up the mountain. And he said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them, or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long, and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness. And he added nothing more. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me.
So the fifth commandment instructs us to honour our father and our mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. So it's a simple command asking us to respect and love our parents. And that's surely is right. It's something that we should do. And of course, what we also realise is that the way we honour our parents changes as we grow up and grow older and go on to have our own families. So instead of obeying them, we really need to look after them. And let's listen to this bit about
And why do
Jesus.
you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father or mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition, you hypocrites. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules.
Yes, this is quite strong words by Jesus, that he repeats this commandment very strongly and challenges. This is mainly the teachers of the law. It's not the ordinary people. These are the scribes and the Pharisees and the teachers, the priests, etc., that seem to be disobeying this law in a big way. It was obviously a problem in Jewish society at the time Jesus was doing his mission, that there were a significant number of people avoiding this commandment because they were saying, well, if I'm working for God, then I am not obliged to care for my parents. That seems could be the only reason why Jesus would have said this in a very strong way, and it's typical of his criticism of the teachers of Israel. J. John says this about this commandment. What does it mean for us to honour our parents in families that are so fragmented? What can this commandment, based on a culture so different from ours, have to say to us in a world where the dysfunctional family seems to be normal? The first thing to say is that it's easy to overestimate the differences in this area between 21st century AD culture and Moses' day, hardly the golden age of family either. The Bible, in its honest and unflattering way, gives us tales of families that are spectacularly dysfunctional, as any we see on our television screens. This people knew about the complex and difficulties that reside in families, and that is so true, isn't it? As Christian people, we need to honour our parents and honour our children in their parenting. So this commandment works in a various amount of ways. And perhaps the best foundation for a solid and good family life is a solid marriage that we all need to work on. And whether we have young children or teenagers, or whether our children have their own children or teenagers, it's tough. We know that. And it still is our responsibility to help out where we can, even if that's at grandparents or as uncles or aunties. Of course, when we look at the biblical account and we look at the Jewish situation, the Jews had strong family links over the generations. It just wasn't the mother, father, and 2.8 kids or whatever we want to say. It was, the Bible often referred to families generationally. And that's why in the Bible so often we have that so-and-so was the son of someone else, so-and-so, almost bringing the bonds together. But there are two parts then to this commandment. It's about children honouring their parents, and it's also about parents honouring to their children. And there's various places in Scripture that emphasize that. And I think the most strongest place we see that is in the story of Ruth in our Bibles. The whole story of Ruth and Naomi are strong links about how families should help each other out through difficult circumstances and honour each other in a whole way. And that theme runs throughout the Scriptures, but also the Scriptures show us some very dysfunctional families to do as well. All societies, I think, are held together by the links that are run in families through the generations. And that's why we have this commandment. God obviously saw that. It was one of the most important things that we should know and look far beyond the words in the commandment itself. It's got many under and overtones that are encouraging us to work at being part of good, strong families in relationship. And of course, as I speak about this, I realise, not just within our households, but this goes beyond our little cluster, we might say, that often families go through difficult periods. Their families are full of hurts and grief and guilt. Members of families fall out with each other. And families become source of not only some great blessings, but also some of our deepest pains. I suspect we've all experienced that from time to time. You know, it's not some many funerals I go to when I start investigating the structures of families. You find out that there's been family breakups, and perhaps some members of the family won't be present at the funeral because of some disagreement or falling out years ago, and it's never ever been repaired, even in amongst Christian families. And as we was just talking at the beginning before we started today, we was thinking of the Queen's family as they get together to honour the Duke of Edinburgh. We know at least there's one grandson that's fallen out with the rest of the family. But we're thankful that he's at least going to attend the funeral, and we pray that that will give the time for that family to heal the hurts of these past week. You see, families was God's idea, undoubtedly. His design for the world was around families and children being brought up in families and children looking after their parents. So we can see that God affirms families. that God's story reveals good and the bad of families. And it points out to us through these scripture stories that families will always be under threat in one way or another. And that's why we need to guard them preciously and make every effort to keep our families together. I was just thinking as we looking at this, and J. John points it out in his book, if you look at Jewish families, he says, I believe one of the primary reasons Judaism has survived across the years is precisely its family structure. The Jews survived the Holocaust and thousands of years of anti-Semitism because the Jewish family has a sense of identity and a sense of order. It doesn't matter where the family is on the Sabbath. When the Sabbath comes, they stop, pray, and eat together. It didn't matter what Hitler and all the powers of Nazism said. When Passover came, it was still time to tell the story of their family, even if the family was gathered together in a concentration camp and there was no food or candles to light. There was that sense of order and identity that gave them roots and strength and perspective and discipline. At the heart of that family structure was a reverence for parents, a high regard, a high respect, and esteem for the older members of the family. The elderly were honoured and cared for always, and they always tried to get together on the Sabbath. So that's quite interesting, isn't it, to think about that? As we think back and know, that the Jews struggle against anti-Semitism even today, and yet their family structures are still very strong. So for us today, this commandment really speaks that we need to be involved in creating families that work and worked to stick together. Some things then that might help us. 4 things I think might help us to keep our families strong together. First of all, we need to learn from family failures, and the scriptures are full of family failures from beginning to the end. Perhaps the most obvious one is the story of Jacob's family. Jacob and Joseph and the multicolored coat and all the rest of it. On the surface, Jacob's family was large, and God had brought this family together to be the beginnings of his family that would turn into his kingdom. They had many strengths. They were determined, hardworking. They were good businessmen. But, of course, there were many difficulties that are in the stories. When faced with conflict, they often relied on their own resources rather than seeking God's help. They tended to accumulate wealth for wealth's sake. They never learned that family security and peace doesn't rely on the accumulation of material goods and wealth and prestige. They never fully understood that all human intentions and actions, for good or evil, were woven into God's plan for them, his ongoing plan. That's not what they saw. And that's why they were so dysfunctional. How can anybody believe that if they treat one of their sons with great favoritism and privilege, that will go down among the rest? That sort of thing would never unite any family, favouring one against the others. And that carried on in a number of families. David's family and Solomon's family too are highlighted in this area, where David and Solomon were not good fathers. They may have been good leaders of their nation, but they certainly weren't good fathers, and their behavior of fathers often led to major problems in their reigns. The stories are there in the Bible for us to read so we can learn from our mistakes. But even people who must have known the stories didn't always take notice of them. Think particularly of King George V. He was a remote and distant father, always abrupt and cold apparently with his children. On one occasion, a member of the royal court mildly suggested to the king that he might be a little more relaxed with his children. He replied rather sternly, "My father was frightened of his father. I was frightened of my father, and I'm damn well going to see to it that my children are frightened of me." I mean, what a thing to think and live by. I mean, this expresses with painful clarity the way failure in families can run unchecked and cause problems through countless generations when that sort of belief and behavior happens within a family chain. That's not the way to teach children to behave and to learn. It's not good and causes problems for the future. So we need to learn from the failures of the stories in the Christian Gospels. And this is also true. It's not true for parents, but it's true also, I believe, for grandparents too, that we treat children fairly. And if we haven't got grandchildren, it may be nieces and nephews that we've got some family connection with. You can't favour anybody. I think the one thing I ever learned from my father was that he would never treat myself or my brother differently from one another. The amount of money that was spent on presents and the opportunities and the discipline would always be the same between the two of us. And he made a point of emphasis at that. And I've always tried to do that with my children and my grandchildren. We've got to avoid favoritism amongst our children. Yes, we may get on better with some of our grandchildren or children more than others, but that's no reason to have outstanding favorites that obviously will alienate the less favorite one. Now let's think about that a bit more. You know, favoritism is not because a mother might be able to relate to a shy artistic daughter and not be able to connect easily with an extrovert rugby playing son. It's the question is, we shouldn't treat daughters and sons differently. We shouldn't give them preferential treatment. We may be able to give them a helping hand more in specific areas because that's where our own gifts are good, but we must avoid favoritism at all costs. And I believe that I can still see that in families around me today. It's not a good way to bring up families or get families to stay together. Thirdly, then, we need to persist with communication and prioritize family meals together. I think this is one of the saddest things in recent years, is that we never seem to prioritize sitting round eating meals together as families, whether that's just the parents and children, or even when grandparents or aunts or uncles are around in family situations. Several surveys over the years say that the family meal is less and less popular than ever. It's been estimated that only 1 in 5 families regularly eat together just once a week. That's incredible. And it can't help the situation, because when we meet around a meal table and we concentrate each other, I mean, we've got rules in our families at the meal tables these days. Of course, mobile phones are not good. And so we ask when our families meet up that all phones are out of sight, switched off, etc. Where conversations can take place. It's always good to have a family meal, and I'm thankful that on most occasions when I meet with families, we do eat round the table. It always seems much more civilized and something that should be encouraged all the way round. Now, it may be some of us haven't got big tables anymore to sit the family around, but we need to remember the principles of that. When most families we see sit round and have TV dinners and never talk to each other, and the television is always on, that can't be good. One of the experts from Raising Our Kids says this: when children and parents can relax and chat round a table, it has many benefits. Children learn table manners, how to hold a conversation, and research shows that when families eat together, they eat better nutritionally, and surprisingly, their children are more successful academically. Have you ever been to a restaurant and there's been families in there, and there's one family that is obviously not used to sitting around eating a meal together? The kids are all over the place, climbing over, won't sit down and eat. That causes absolute pandemonium in restaurants, doesn't it? It's very embarrassing. And of course, this must come from the children are not used to sitting around at meal times either. But we must do that. Now, I know when children get older, it's more difficult during the week with all the schedules children have with after school clubs and all the rest of it. But we should still endeavour to try and encourage families to eat round a table, even if it's not every day of the week, when it can be done. And of course, that's a good opportunity when, as Christian families who gather around tables, then grace can be a priority, and it's a time to pray around the table. And I always believe that's a wonderful thing to do if you can manage that. So then, fourthly, don't forget we all have to forgive and to encourage. This is the most important thing. Families, there's always going to be problems in families, but we do need to be encouragers and forgivers in families. Very few families can go through life without major upsets of one thing or another. But if you keep this in mind, that we all have to forgive. Well, probably like me, I've forgotten a number of times I had to forgive my kids for bad behaviour at one thing of another in family life. But eating round the table always helps, I think, with this. It's often been said, of course, that we can't choose our families, and that is true. But if you notice, this is the only promise, the only commandment that comes with a promise. It says that if you keep this commandment, you will live long and long life together, the one that comes with that. We were given life by God, who gave us parents to look after and to love us. Although some of us might not have very good experiences of one or both parents, it doesn't give us an excuse to avoid honouring our parents. respecting them, and to forgive them more than once. Remember, forgiveness is not limited. We are encouraged to always forgive, no matter how many mistakes our children make. You know, there's always heartaches with children and grandchildren when they make mistakes and cause us upset. They often make mistakes. They may not ask for them or may not take the advice that we offer. But we mustn't forget to forgive and to praise them whenever we can. Praising children always is the thing we must bear in mind. And it's sad when you see that parents, when they shout at children, yes, there may be that's something, but sometimes when it goes on and on, it's not the way to bring up children, crush them and make them afraid of you, that you're going to hit them or something. It's always good to have a forgiving nature and an encouraging nature. That's what God is saying, I believe, in this commandment. These are the lessons we still need to learn. And if we learn them well, then as our years go on, we will reap the blessings of these. So honor your father and mother as the Lord your God commanded you. Then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord is giving you. That was the promise. That's the bottom line. Honor your parents. And as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, we should continue to honor our children, to forgive them for their faults, and to encourage them in their lives. So let's pray now for our families.